So UFC Fight Night, Bautista versus Oliveira just concluded, and overall, it was a pretty good one. We had a lot of finishes on this fight. We had a lot of blood. We had a couple slow moments here and there. But overall, this was a pretty good fight card. Not bad for this first one of the year and on the Paramount. I'm about to do as I usually do. Start from the beginning. Going to continue all the way to the main event. Give my thoughts, reactions, and breakdowns on each fight up to this point, as well as compare and contrast to my predictions. Let's get this started with the early prelim fight of Claudia Segula versus Priscilla Cachoeira. Now, for this fight, I'd picked Cachoeira. I thought her power would have got it done. I thought that she would have been able to get in there, overwhelm Claudia, and basically make it all the way to a decision. And she was fully capable of doing that, which is kind of the frustrating part for me with this fight. Claudia was basically just out technically her, but the skill gap wasn't big enough for her to really be ahead that far. Basically, what was happening is she kept circling to the right, sometimes the left, but primarily the right, and Cachoeira just couldn't really catch up to her. Claudia maintained that distance for the majority of the fight, and Cachoeira basically just kept trying to get her with a big winging punch. The thing is, that right side was always open, and Cachoeira never ever efficiently cut off the ring for extended periods of time. She did it in short bursts, and whenever she did, it was effective. And whenever they actually traded blows, we saw that Cachoeira was the one who was much more effective. There was definitely a big power gap between the two. There was one time, quite literally just one time throughout the entire fight, where Cachoeira used a right body kick in order to stop the advance. I said that Claudia was circling to the right, but she was circling to Cachoeira's right, so she would have been circling to her own left side. But that's why when Cachoeira used the right kick, it actually connected to her left side. But Cachoeira used her right body kick, and that fully contained Claudia. But she never, ever made that transition, that connection, and actually made the adaptations, which is really disappointing to see by somebody who's supposed to be a world-class fighter. Basically, it was a fight where she could have knocked her out. And I was expecting that at some point for her to recognize. Even the leg kicks, she was doing low kicks and they were piling up, but she would just stop doing it for no reason whatsoever. So it was really just kind of crazy to see such low fight IQ from somebody who's a UFC fighter, who's supposed to be a world-class fighter. Either way, Claudia managed to steal 2 to 3 of those rounds, but most based on the judges' scorecards, and secure the victory. Claudia definitely was the rightful winner by the end of the decision, but it was just really disappointing to see someone like Priscilla Cachoeira, who has those experiences and been in for a while, but just keep trying to go for the same winging punch that wasn't working with no setups. And when you did try the setups and they were effective, you just stopped doing them for no reason at all. But I started off with just a few picks wrong, but don't worry, I pick it back up. But moving on to the next fight, we had Muin Gafurov versus Jakub Wiklax. Now, in this one, I believe I did go with Wiklax in this, and it more or less went a little bit surprising to me because I was expecting Wiklax's striking to be a bit more effective in this matchup. So, but as one of the commentators themselves said, Wiklax basically is like a younger version of DDP, or no, more accurately, Rainer the Ritter, in how his style looks and even his skill set. He's very similar to Rainer the Ritter in a lot of aspects looking. Gafurov was basically just outstriking him, which I didn't expect to be that glaring, but Gafurov was just completely outstriking him. Whenever it came to clashes, Gafurov was the more aggressive. He dictated the pace better. Gafurov was overall just better with the hands. But Gafurov, also following the theme of the previous fight, this low fight IQ from people who are supposed to be world class fighters is a travesty. We see Gafurov rushing in, throwing all types of bombs, and being the more effective fighter when it comes to the stand up, yet still, he ends up going to the ground constantly for no reason. Yeah, don't get me wrong, there was a couple moments where Wicklax caught him with the kicks, caught him a couple times with the fists, but not as much as he did with the kicks that were really being effective. But yet still, we saw that Gafurov kept trying to force wrestling. And I know he comes from that Marab camp. So I'm sure that that is absolutely a skill set of his. However, recognize the path of least resistance. You were intentionally kept making an easy fight harder. Because it was an easy fight for Gafurov because he was that ahead. He just had to be fundamentally sound. And he kept charging and taking unnecessary risk. By the end of the third round, Gafurov was the clear winner in everybody's minds. And even though Wicklax was my pick, it's still Gafurov was intentionally going balls to wall for no reason. And after already being up, it reminds me a bit of a worse version of Diego Lopez versus Gene Silva in the second round, where Silva just threw everything through the kitchen sink at Lopez and wasn't satisfied with that. Like he needed to keep going harder and harder. Same shit with Aaron Pico versus Lerone Murphy. It's like you going. And Gafurov went and then he did something stupid where he tried to get a takedown on the superior submission specialist. And while doing that, Wicklax was able to recognize the opening and get him in that choke right at the end of the round. And even then, I'm like, Gafurov looked at the time, both before and during that exchange. It's like, I will never understand tapping within the last 5 seconds of a goddamn fight. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. It's not that bad. You look at the time. You know how much. You heard the clappers for the last 10 seconds. You know the fight is almost over and you know that you're the one who's winning. Don't panic tap. Go to sleep because it's going to take a little bit longer than that to choke you out, most likely. Just get up fast enough so that they don't rule it as you were already knocked out. That's it. But Gafurov damn near panic tapped immediately after the choke got locked up. And then afterwards, they tried to play the game of, oh, nah, he didn't tap. And oh, it was after the bell. Like, bro, when you look at that replay, it was clear as day what happened. He tapped with their left hand right before the bell. And I saw people saying, some of the commentators and announcers are saying, well, I saw him tap with the right one after, and I didn't. He tapped with the right one before the bell too. He just tapped with both hands before the bell in the last 2 seconds of the fight. Are you fucking kidding me? For a world-class fighter? You couldn't just hold out? You know you're close to the end and you're tapping to a submission? Like, it's not that bad. You can last. Like, Jesus. But either way, Jacob Wicklax manages to win by submission. Congratulations to him. But fucking hell, bro. Like, some of these fighters really got to do an IQ test. Well, moving on to the next fight. We had Wang Kong versus Eduardo Mora. In this one, Wang Kong ended up being victorious. My pick was Mora. I thought that Mora would have been able to impose her will better. I thought she would have been able to set up her counters better. As I had said in my prediction, I expected Wang Kong to be the more aggressive fighter, which she was once she became comfortable. She really dictated that pace. This is another fight where I believe that Mora, or I believe the fighter could have ended up getting the win if they had just made some better strategic decisions. In the striking, like just pure striking, Wang Kong was just superior. It just is what it is. Like Wang Kang was simply the superior fighter when it came to pure striking. However, Mora was able to like hold her own enough to mix in her other skills, i.e., her grappling and submission. But I believe that Mora kind of tried to do that too sporadically early and then tried to forcefully do it too late in the end. Initially, I believe that should have been her main plan. I understand the desire to get comfortable in there and see how your striking holds up. However, all of these fighters do research on their opponents. You research your opponent, you understand where you're strong and weak against them. Mora should have the better game plan of using effective striking, i.e., using your striking to blend with your other skills, as opposed to just pure striking, which is just trading blow for blow with an opponent, especially Wang Kang is the superior striker. Like Mora kind of was winning that first round, but then when it came to the last two, you really saw a shift in momentum and pace. Wang Kong was not only pacing herself better, she also was just having the better counters. She was really solid with that takedown defense for the most part. Like, even look at the difference in total strikes. Like, Wang Kong had 147 versus Mora's 40. And then you saw that Mora had 3 takedowns, and they each had a submission attempt apiece, with Wang Kong's coming at the end of the fight. And then even looking at the difference in significant strikes and knockdowns, Wang Kong really was just the fighter who was doing a lot more, putting a lot more together. She was just the smarter fighter in there. And Mora basically should have really, like, after that first round, she should have just been a bit more strategic in how she attempted to implement her game plan. Overall, it was a pretty decent fight. Moving on, we have Javid Basharat versus Gianni Vasquez, first of the Basharat brothers. You're going to hear me say this when I get to his younger brother later in the card, but this is really a fight where Basharat was just the better skilled fighter. Like, he was much more skilled when it came to just overall well-roundedness and effectiveness than Vasquez was. However, there was a glaring gap once it came to power. And Vasquez, when he recognized that, once he connected and he started really putting it on Basharat, that's what made this fight more competitive. It was the fact that Gianni Vasquez, when he connected, it was a lot more dangerous. Basharat had to do 3 things to make up for Vasquez's 1. And sometimes Basharat had to do 5 things to make up for Vasquez's 1. So overall, it was a really fun fight to see. Well, Basharat won clearly. Basharat was, not only was he landing more, once again, look at the total strikes, he also was doing more, once again, more takedown attempts, even though Vasquez was the one who tried to put up submission attempts on the counters. And you saw that Vasquez also had a reversal. But when you look at the significant strikes, Basharat literally has more than double the significant strikes and knockdowns than Vasquez. That's because Basharat was just putting so much more together. He was so much more effective in his imposing of his will as well as his skill set. His thought process, you really saw the difference in the fight IQ of the two. Basharat was timing him better, he was setting him up better, and he was pacing himself a lot better. But Vasquez, for somebody who was throwing some of the bombs, he was definitely held up pretty well overall. He's definitely a fighter that I'd like to see again in the near future. Whereas with Basharat, while I feel the same, I'd love to see him in the near future, but he really definitely, I would say, give him a tougher challenge as far as skill set wise for his next matchup. Moving on, we have Bruna Brazil versus Ketlin Souza. Now, I know I said that I'm not choosing Bruna Brazil because she's not good, and that's why I chose Ketlin Souza. What I didn't take into account was that Souza shit as well. And mind you, Souza won, and Souza was my pick. This was a shitty fight. This shit was annoying. And don't get me wrong, Bruna Brazil basically fought how she always does. Very timid, like not effective, all the stuff. But this fight felt different. Because initially, Bruna Brazil was dominating. She was outstriking her, maintaining distance well. She was really preventing the takedown attempts. Bruna Brazil was just better. But how this fight came, and I know that I believe they know each other and they're cool outside of the ring, outside of the octagon. However, these two were fighting like the way how Bruna Brazil specifically was fighting. She was fighting like she was fighting her little sister. I mean, we have Caitlin Souza who's constantly wiping her hands on her shorts because of the sweat, and Bruna Brazil there constantly giving her time to get herself together, and she's just laughing and smiling the whole time while you're losing the fight. And then Souza is there and she's doing submission attempts, and Brazil is just literally just running around the whole octagon like it's a fucking dance party. It felt like, wait, and as shitty as it was, it felt like Katlyn Souza came here to fight and Bruna Brazil came here to play. Bruna Brazil out here in the first round, she was so effective with that jab from the distance and the low kicks and just maintaining that pressure and those counters. She was so much better than Katlyn Souza. There's no reason she should have lost this fight. She was so ahead of her skill set and technique wise, yet still, Katlyn Souza beat her just by actually trying more. She just tried more. Like, even look at this differential 65 versus 64 for the total strikes. And they each got a takedown apiece. But yet still, Katlyn Souza is the one with more significant strikes. Mind you, the first round was damn near lopsided. So it's like Bruna Brazil literally just took her entire foot off the gas and then started stepping on the brake. It's like it's ridiculous and it's incredible to think that she's from the Fighting Nerds, a camp who's got people like Gene Silva and possibly formerly Mauricio Hofi and Caio Baralho, like people who and even Carlos Prates, people, and even when you look at Alex Shejak, who we'll get to later in this card, people who are known to be very, very pressure heavy fighters, people who large portions of their style is pressing their opponent forward, people who sometimes it can be argued that they don't back up and reset enough. These are the type of fighters that are in Bruna Brazil's camp, and yet still she's so fucking passive of a fighter. She's so passive. She does so little. Like she literally just allows herself to get beat. It's so frustrating to see. She literally just allows herself to get beat in a lot of these fights. She should have finished this fight in the second round max, and yet still she lost just by virtue of not doing shit. Like, I'm not gonna lie, if the way how infuriating, I really think that she just needs somebody to just tell her how it is. Because she really needs to do something different. But in my opinion, keep both of these fighters on the early prelims because that shit was frustrating. Katlyn Souza just skill set wasn't good, wasn't doing but she was just doing more than Bruna Brazil. But if she was there with anybody with a little bit more common sense, she would have gotten knocked out. I'm over this though. Congratulations to Souza though. Moving on to the next fight. We have Nikolay Vertenikov versus Nico Price. Now, this is a fight that more or less went exactly how I said. I said that, listen, I like Nico Price as much as anybody else, but he's old. He's old, he's not the greatest skill set wise. I was expecting Nikolay to more or less run through him, and that's what happened. Wasn't expecting nothing crazy, Nothing pretty, nothing really too technical. Nicolay basically just went in there and got him out of there, just overwhelmed him, steamrolled him, and that's what you would expect. Price wasn't strong enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't defensively sound enough. He didn't have any attribute or skill set in this moment that gave him a fighting chance against Nicolay. My biggest issue with this fight is the stoppage. I think this fight should have been stopped way before it was. Matter of fact, not even this one. The next one, really. But this one, I think it could have just stopped before it was. The next one we get to, that's that's the one that I'll really lay into. But I do think this fight could have just ended a little bit earlier. Nico Price was out of there. Just like I said, it's sad to see for it's, I can't say it's sad to see Father Time. Like, and Nico Price was never really a top contender, but still a fun fight to watch. But I think it's time. Like, I think it's for some of these fighters, they got to recognize when their time is done. Moving on. We have Alex Morono versus Daniel Danchenko. This fight more or less went exactly how I said as well. Big fan of Morono, tough guy. But as I said in my prediction, he is the type of guy that's willing to die on his shield. And Daniel Danchenko basically was beating him to that point. Like, he was getting beat from pillar to post. Like, yeah, his leg was getting chewed up. He wasn't checking the kicks until way after. It was too late and the leg was compromised. I also have to give this critique for somebody who's been in the UFC as long as he has. I think on this card, he's the fighter with the most UFC fights total. You should be able to somewhat decently switch legs. Like, even Morono, when he had that lead left leg getting chewed up, he just couldn't switch to his right. He legit just couldn't stand switch. Like, he just couldn't, even for any type of competency. Because even when he attempted after his leg was completely chewed up, he still kept trying to go back to the leg just instinctually. That is something that you should have worked to some extent by this point. Here, with I think over 20 UFC fights, you should have had the experience to know that, yo, I should have, even if I'm not great, I should be at least okay. But Daniel Danchenko, he was hitting him. I think it got to a point where Danchenko was just immersed in the fact that Moreno was still here, and he was just like, yo, you can't really do anything too crazy to me to hurt me. Because he stopped. There was a multiple moments where he just stopped hitting Moreno, and he would kind of just posture at him, just look at him a little bit. That you'd see them in a shootout, then he just stopped hitting Moreno, and he's like he looked at him like, huh, you really still here, huh? Like, he kind of had a lot of those moments. They'd be in the mid center of the ring, he just looking at him. They'll exchange a couple of blows, hit Morono, then try to throw some bombs on him. Morono really struggled to survive it, and then you're like, wow, he was still here, huh? I'm like, just to show you, like, this was really a beating. Like, look at the total strikes. It's 48 to 134. You look at the significant strikes. Like, Daniel Danchenko threw 60 more significant strikes than Morono. Not to mention the knockdown. It's just that it was really just a one-sided beating. I think Morono should have retired. It was a perfect opportunity. Stage was set. Just go out on your shield, sir. Like, it's time. Like, you're beyond, once you get beyond the point that you can even be considered a sufficient gatekeeper anymore, yeah, it's the time to hang it up. You don't need all the extra and unnecessary brain trauma. There's no benefits to it. Moving on, we have the first fight of the main card, and this is the finish I really wanted to get into. We started off with Dustin Jacoby versus Julius Walker. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little salty because, like I said, initially I was thinking of picking Dustin Jacoby over Walker. But in my mind, in my reasoning, I was thinking, Jacoby's getting older. As I said before, he's clearly the significantly more skilled fighter of the two. Like, it wasn't even close when it comes to just pure skill set wise. Jacoby was much more skilled than Walker. But I thought, well, Walker had the youth and he has the size and he has his durability on his side. When you put all those attributes together and then you think about the fact that Jacoby's kind of been in this decline, I know that he's had his knockouts here and there recently, but I know that he's been on an overall decline. I'm like, okay, then when I consider all of those factors, Julius Walker should be the winner. But Dustin Jacoby proving me wrong. He really got in there and just put a beating on Walker. He went in there, just was faster, he was stronger, he was more accurate. Walker did try to use his size to his advantage, but Jacoby like really did a great job of not allowing that to happen. And then I know that these two have some familiarity with each other, but it's still neither of them really making that get in the way until arguably the end when Jacoby managed to get that finish. And at that point, once again, listen, I like Dan. Dan's one of my favorite referees, personally, despite a lot of the flaws he may have. But you should have stopped that fight a lot earlier than it did. The point when Jacoby turned around and looked at him was like, hey, like, in my opinion, that was still a little bit too early because Julius Walker was still fighting back. But after that, when Jacoby's throwing bombs after bombs after bombs and Walker is out and he's beating him up, just beating him up there, it's like, yo, like, what are you doing? Like, what more do you need to see? Like, this man is damn near incapacitated, and you're still just letting him get beat and his head bashed in for this entire onslaught. And for those who might even argue and say, nah, it wasn't too early, really look at that fight and take 30, the moment when Dan actually stopped the fight, go back 30 seconds from that point and set a timer and literally put it back to 30 seconds before that. And tell me honestly, if that fight stops 30 seconds earlier, would you say it was an early stoppage? And if the answer to that question isn't no, then you've already gotten your response for whether or not this shit was a late stoppage. Because 30 seconds is a lot of time in fighting. And if after 30 seconds you still would say that it was a good stoppage, then that means it went on for way too long. Hopefully, Julius Walker can recover well and better prepare, but the name of the game was just striking or just a complete outclassing. Julius Walker wasn't able to utilize his grappling. Jacoby just made it look easy. Moving on. We have the younger Basharat brother in Farid Basharat versus Gene Matsumoto. And in my opinion, the more skilled of the two. But overall, I'm actually a bit surprised that this went to a split decision. But Basharat really put on a good performance. I think for the first 2 rounds, give or take, Basharat was really like the one who was insuperior. In my opinion, even though I know that a lot of people are like a bit split on the second round, I think Basharat won those 2 rounds like convincingly. And I think the commentators need to get their eyes checked for this fight. Because constantly from the start to all the way throughout the third round of this fight, I kept hearing people say, well, you know, that it's closely contested, and oh, this is close, and oh, they're evenly matched. And I'm like, what part of this fight was evenly matched? First of all, as we say all the time, the first and top scoring criteria for UFC is damage. Let's start there. For the entire fight, all of the blood that you saw until maybe the middle to the end of the third round was from Matsumoto. Every single drop was from Matsumoto. None of it was from Basharat. So off damage alone, Basharat won those first two rounds. To go even deeper and more into the breakdown, Gene Matsumoto was a step behind in every striking exchange for the entirety of the first round. He was slower. He wasn't landing a lot less. He threw a lot more. He attempted a lot more. Yet still he was a lot further behind. I know the numbers might imply different, but the reason why in this matchup where you see there was more total strikes thrown by Matsumoto for the entirety of the fight, yet still there was more significant strikes landed by Basharat. Basharat was the more effective striker for the entirety of that fight. When you look at the takedowns, well, you see there are so many more takedowns for Matsumoto versus Basharat. Most of that started coming in play for the latter half of the second round, going into the third, and that's because Matsumoto had to do a lot more to keep up with Basharat. Basharat was carrying ahead. He was faster, he was quicker, had better counters, more accurate strikes. He was overall just a better fighter, and he still had to stave off a couple of takedowns in despite the ones that landed. You looked at the fight, you didn't really start seeing a momentum shift until Basharat started getting tired in the latter half of the second round going into the third. When he got tired, he started becoming sloppy, started throwing less cleanly, less clean, less straight, less accurate, started also being less defensively sound. Example is, I myself definitely am guilty of it in sparring. You have your hands up, you guarding your face, you doing all this, you tired, this is the highest you can keep your hands. And this shit feels heavy. You out here, you feel weighted down. Basharat was going from having his closed guard and being really locked up to his shit was looking like this at certain points. So he was getting hit with a lot of straight punches and counters because Matsumoto definitely was the one with the better cardio. And it felt as if Matsumoto, well, recognizing that he could potentially be behind and how important the third round was really trying to pick up the pace. And despite that, it's arguably that the third round went to Basharat as well. But I personally give it to Matsumoto. I think he just did too much in the third round. And then especially with Basharat just being a little bit more defensive, I gave Matsumoto the third round. But I give the first two to Basharat, and I think it's clear if we're looking at the actual judging criteria. Basharat did more damage and had less damage done to him in the first two rounds. So I don't see how this became a split decision by sanctioned judges. But I think the right person got the victory regardless. And I'm not just saying that because it's my pick. Moving on. We have Mikhail Oliveira versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Not gonna lie, this fight surprised me a bit. Not because of the outcome, because Mikhail was my pick, but because of the back and forth. I thought that Oliveira was gonna get Andre Barriault out of here a lot sooner. I wasn't expecting this fight to go to a decision, and I was expecting Andre Barriault to slow down sooner. I thought it was because of his age as well as just the accumulation that Mikhail would put on him. But surprisingly, especially in the exchange, Marc-Andre Barriault was just more powerful. Like he was just significantly more powerful. This kind of feels a bit like a less technical version of the older Basharat brothers fight, whereas you saw Oliveira just putting it on him, but then Marc-Andre Barriault just would crack him with these bombs. When they started connecting, it's like Mikhail had to become defensive. For a fighter who's usually pretty offensive, he was forced to take a more defensive stance because it was just too much to continue risking. And then While Marc-Andre Barriot was getting hit a lot more. Once again, look at the strikes. Total strikes were 44 to 73. And then the significant strikes was 140 to 77. And Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, who is not known to be a grappler in any definition of the word, had to utilize grappling. Even I myself was like, bro, like, grapple him. Like, you saw the bigger reactions coming from Oleksiejczuk whenever they did land from Barriol. And you saw Oleksiejczuk switch up the targets a lot, cracking body shots, mixing in headhunting, cracking body shots to really keep Marc-Andre Barriol honest. But Barriol really just withered the storm, took a lot of hits, and gave some really lethal ones in return. Overall, this was definitely a very much a high tense fight, a very intense fight that had a lot of high suspense with it, because when you saw that, it felt as if Oleksiejczuk just makes a couple more mistakes, he's gonna go out. You really felt it. At some point, you for somebody who's had, I believe, four out of his prior to this fight, I think 4 out of his last 5 wins were by knockout, by finish. But for somebody who is known as a finisher, it felt as if he was the one who was in danger of being finished if he just was a little bit less strategic and defensively sound. Overall, great performance from by both of them. From what it is, I definitely think that Oleksiejczuk has to diversify his game plan a little bit more now, especially knowing that you can't always just rely on your striking, and you need to improve that grappling and also be prepared for in case you go against somebody who just has a bigger gun than you do. It's still, for lack of a better analogy, but overall, this is a pretty fun fight. Like overall, there was a lot of fun fights on this card. Moving on, we had the feature main event of Jelton Almeida versus Rizvan Kuniev, and also the last fight that I got wrong. Not that I get wrong on this card, but it was Jelton Almeida versus Rizvan Kuniev. I think in this fight, it's a bit similar to the Bruna, so to the Bruna type of shit. Whereas with Bruna Silva, I always say that with her issue is just, as I was saying earlier, she just wasn't doing enough. I feel like Jelton Almeida really suffers from that same affliction, because in this fight, Rizvan Kuniev was throwing a lot. He had a lot more weapons. He was throwing punches and knees and kicks, and then at some point, he just started doing things to feel like to slow down the fight. It felt as if whenever they fully exchanged, like they both committed to striking, Jelton Almeida was the better striker. He landed more. He felt he was being more effective despite being the one with less striking pedigree. When he tried to wrestle, I expected him to get a submission in this fight. He tried to wrestle. Kuniev was really doing well as far as just defending against the takedowns and preventing him from really locking in. And I feel like whenever, especially in that third round, when Almeida just committed to a shootout, he was being very effective and he was really landing. And I genuinely believe he should have done that much sooner. Much sooner. He should, once again, same shit with the Bruno Silva, the fight IQ is low, because you're in a position. It's similar to when he lost to Curtis Blades, whereas when he got the takedown and he mentally just couldn't connect to, he's elbowing me in a position that I'm not defending whatsoever. I should let go and reset. In this one, it's like he's so committed to just shooting takedowns and nothing else that he isn't connecting. I've attempted 4 or 5 takedowns and he stopped all of them. I keep attempting them and he's stopping them. And I am not Merab Devashvili. I am paying for it when I do this. I should adjust the game plan. When I strike with him, I get a little bit more reaction. Perhaps I should keep doing that. He mentally doesn't make those connections. And overall, in the end, it just led to his defeat. He lost by decision to a fighter that honestly didn't even deserve the opportunity to compete against him. But he still lost because of his own carelessness and piss poor effort and just unwillingness to engage in risk situations. Being overly risk averse led to his defeat. I think, personally, I think it's honestly it's better for the division for Almeida to not be in the top six, not even from an entertainment factor. I think he generally just needs to rebuild. He needs to rebuild his style. He needs to readjust. He needs to really take some time and get more comfortable with other aspects of his game because he seems to not be able, when it comes to critical situations, he genuinely seems unable of thinking about anything else besides wrestling as a defensive strategy. Moving on, we have the co-main event, which is Amir Albazi versus Kyoji Horiguchi. This fight basically was what I said, which is the reason why I committed to Horiguchi. He's simply more experienced, he's faster, he's more skilled, he's more technical. It really just came down to that. Amir Albazi had a great attempt. He attempted to mix in the wrestling. He realized he tried to strike with him, but he realized he just couldn't keep up with it. He couldn't touch him properly. He couldn't really have proper exchanges because he would receive but not respond in time. So like he had a great attempt, and he has a great story of even being able to still compete despite everything with his heart issues and stuff. But Kyoji Horiguchi was just too much for him. Like it's kind of similar to what happened when he fought Morono, in which he just couldn't keep up, he couldn't respond, and when the takedowns and the wrestling, grappling attempts failed, he kind of was just in a position where he was out in the mud, just sinking and stuck. And Horiguchi just overwhelmed and battered him for all 3 rounds. Horiguchi very fast, in and out. His darting techniques was very impressive. Like that karate stance, bladed stance really allows you to make incredible lateral movement. We've seen it from people like Michael Venom Page and even from Wonderboy Thompson. You and even old Conor McGregor. Like you really see the speed that that karate bladed stance affords you. Well, overall, Amir Albazi just had way too much on his plate. He just couldn't handle any aspect of Horiguchi's game. Because, especially with the Jiu Jitsu, Horiguchi was just able to really defend that wrestling. When it came to those final moments, Horiguchi still chased that finish and almost got it. You saw that he stumbled Albazi, and then at the end, he really was hunting him down. This was a 5 round fight. In the 4th round, it'd be over. Like you saw Horiguchi really put it on him. And Albazi had a valiant effort, but even this lopsided result, 20 total strikes versus 99. And these 20 total strikes don't even speak to how many strikes Albazi attempted. But as I said, he literally just couldn't reach him. Couldn't reach him, couldn't connect to him. You see the significant strike differential? Couldn't reach him, couldn't connect to him, while the entire time he's being targeted and lit up like a Christmas tree. Overall, congrats to Horiguchi. Definitely interested to see him against other contenders now that he's in that upper ranks. Once again, unfortunately, Albazi's another fighter I think just it's better for the division that he's outside of the top 5, top 6, because he's basically holding up a spot. He doesn't fight frequently, has the constant health issues. He just, when it comes to a competitive aspect, it's better to give those positionings to some people who are able to compete. It's one of the same reasons why they ended up removing Shafkat from the rankings, despite how many people were upset. Like, can't be in a competition, can't be considered a competitor if you can't compete. Just is what it is. Moving on, we got the main event, which is Mario Bautista versus Vinicius Oliveira. And this fight, as I said, when I was comparing and contrasting the two initially, it genuinely would have been disrespectful for me to not choose Mario Bautista to win this fight. Bautista is just better. If I saw Bautista having the potential to get a finish, but I expect it would come much later. But Bautista was just better. Like, yeah, Vinicius's fists look powerful, but that only matters if they land. And Bautista, being the well rounded fighter that he is, there isn't just one or two aspects to his game. And his grappling looked phenomenal tonight. He was on point. You saw, especially that last exchange where Vinicius Oliveira almost took him down, and you saw him just with that beautiful sweep and then just go right into those different, I believe, 2 to 3 different choke submission attempts before he finally found the choke, which he locked up so tight and so fast. That was incredible. Bautista, his fists were looking good. I personally was feeling a little bit anxious when I saw him trying to exchange with Vinicius at certain points because, once again, while you may be good in certain aspects, you don't need to try to take an intentionally more difficult path, like the path of least resistance. Let's not unnecessarily jeopardize our chins and our heads by placing ourselves in a position where we're going against somebody who's a superior striker. But Bautista still used his striking beautifully, as I was requesting for other fighters to do. He used his striking to set up his grappling and then really mixed it up and really went there. He was fast. He was well conditioned. And I have to point that out because Oliveira looks like he was tired by the end of the first round. It looks like within that last minute to last 45 seconds, the exchange clash was just too high of a pace for him. With how Bautista was throwing the takedown attempts, with how Bautista was mixing up the striking, with how all of that was looking, he was just getting a lot of different weapons to deal with, and he seemed to be just incapable of maintaining all of that in a sufficient conditioning. When you look at the total strikes, you might think, oh, well, how is Oliver the superior striker if Bautista was outstriking him? No, but Bautista was using the takedowns to set up better striking and same thing vice versa. But not only that, those total strikes also were counting strikes where they'd get in clinches, and when he actually would be when in that by the end of that first round where he got him in that crucifix and he was just raining down like elbows and all of those are counting the strikes. It's the reason why even though the total strikes are 49 to 18, the significant strikes are much closer where you see 15 to 12, and that's to show you that despite how much less Oliveira was able to land or attempt, they were that much more effective in comparison to Bautista's. Because when they connected, they looked like they hurt. But Bautista, being the cerebral fighter he is, he adjusted to that, utilized the grappling when he got it, and just such a beautiful exchange, that's some of the cleanest sweeps I've seen in some time. As he said, he definitely learned a lot from Umar in their exchange. Once again, as I was mentioning earlier, it's just in one of the realms that you're most comfortable in, you end up going against somebody who's just better in that realm than you. So that gives you to trigger either you have to develop other aspects to complement that, or you just have to get better in that aspect. And it looks like he definitely did some focus in committing to getting better in that aspect. Overall, it was a really fun event. Had a blast this time. I'm tired, so I'm probably gonna go to sleep for a little bit. Y'all tell me what y'all think though. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. See y'all next time. Peace.